The Dominion had conquered 2,000 worlds. In 400 years of expansion across the galaxy, they had never failed to take what they wanted. They had crushed civilizations that built cities in the hearts of stars. They had destroyed species that could bend time itself. They were the greatest military power the universe had ever known. So when their armada of 50,000 warships entered the Sol system on a quiet Tuesday morning in March, Admiral expected nothing more than routine work. His long reptilian face showed no emotion as he studied the blue and green planet on his Earth, a small world circling an average yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The dominant species, called themselves humans, had reviewed their file with mild amusement. They had been sending radio signals into space for barely a century. Their fastest ships used chemical rockets that would take years to reach even the nearest planet. They split atoms for power and called it advanced technology. By Dominion standards, they were primitive creatures barely worth noticing. But the Dominion noticed everything. Every species that showed signs of intelligence was studied and eventually harvested. Some became slaves, some became food, some were simply erased to make room for colonies. It was the natural order of things. The strong consumed the weak. This was the law of the universe. Opened a communication channel to the planet below. His message was broadcast on every frequency, interrupting television programs and radio stations and mobile phones across the entire world. Inhabitants of Earth, his voice boomed through billions of speakers. I am Admiral of the Dominion. Your planet and all resources upon it now belong to the Dominion. You will surrender unconditionally within one planetary rotation. Any resistance will result in complete annihilation. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning. He closed the channel and settled back in his command chair. In his experience, primitive species usually spent their final hours screaming and crying and begging for mercy. Some tried to fight with their pathetic weapons. Others offered their own children as tribute. All of them eventually broke. Had seen it thousands of times. He expected nothing different from the humans. He was wrong. On the other side of the world, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a young Korean woman named stood on the deck of a research vessel and watched the sky fill with alien ships. She was 26 years old, a naval officer assigned to a scientific expedition studying deep ocean currents. She had joined the Navy because she loved the sea, loved the feeling of endless water stretching to the horizon, loved the idea that there was always something new to discover. Now she discovered that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors had come to kill them all. Around her, the other crew members panicked. Some cried, some prayed, some simply stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. The captain tried desperately to contact Naval Command, but every channel was jammed with the alien transmission playing on repeat. Did none of these things. Instead, she went to her cabin, opened her laptop, and began to record everything. She noted the time the ships appeared. She counted their formations. She analyzed the energy patterns visible in their engines. She calculated their positions and movements with the careful precision of someone who had spent years studying ocean navigation. She did not know why she was doing this. The logical part of her brain told her it was pointless. What could one person do against 50,000 alien warships? What good were observations when extinction was 24 hours away? But another part of her brain, a deeper part that remembered 10,000 generations of ancestors who had survived ice ages and famines and wars and plagues, refused to simply wait for death. If these were humanity's final hours, she would spend them working, fighting, thinking. She would not go quietly. 6,000 kilometers away, in a small apartment in Seoul, her older brother watched the same transmission with very different eyes. He was 31 years old, a quantum physicist who worked at a university laboratory that nobody important ever visited. For 10 years, he had been developing theories about faster-than-light particle manipulation. For 10 years, his colleagues had called him crazy. His theories suggested that space itself could be folded, that matter could be moved through dimensions that conventional physics said did not exist. He had published papers that were ignored. He had requested funding that was. He had been told again and again that his ideas were impossible. Now he watched the alien ships move across his television screen, and he recognized something that made his heart nearly stop. The energy signatures coming from those vessels matched his theoretical models exactly. His hands trembled as he grabbed his phone. Not from fear, though fear was certainly present. His hands trembled from excitement, from the sudden wild hope that maybe, just maybe, he had been right all along. He called immediately. The siblings had always been close, bound together by the early death of their parents and a shared stubbornness that refused to accept limits. When she answered, her voice was calm despite everything. "I know how they move," said without greeting. "The energy patterns, the way their ships appeared without any approach trajectory. They are folding space, bending dimensions. I have been studying this for a decade." "Can you stop them?" asked. The question was so direct, so practical, that almost laughed. Anyone else would have asked if he was sure, if he was crazy, if there was any real hope. His sister simply asked if he could do something useful. "I do not know," he admitted. "My theories are incomplete. I have no way to generate the power required. I have no equipment capable of testing any of this." "Then find someone who does." The call ended, returned to her observations, stared at his phone for a long moment, then began making calls of his own. He did not know it yet, but one of those calls would reach a woman who had been waiting 30 years for this exact moment. As the hours passed, the world descended into chaos. Governments issued contradictory statements. Military forces launched missiles that the alien ships swatted aside like insects. Religious leaders declared the end times. Millions of people fled cities that had nowhere safe to go. Stock markets crashed. Communication networks overloaded and failed. But in small pockets around the globe, something else was happening. People who refused to accept defeat began to find each other. Scientists who had been ignored. Engineers who had been fired for thinking too creatively. Soldiers who had seen too much to believe in impossible odds. Hackers and pilots and farmers and teachers, all connected by a single thought that burned in the human heart like a fire that could not be extinguished. "We will not go quietly." They had conquered 2,000 worlds. They had destroyed civilizations beyond counting. They knew everything about war and death and domination. But they knew nothing about humanity. They did not know that humans had spent their entire existence fighting against extinction. They did not know that the human species had survived ice ages by refusing to freeze, survived famines by refusing to starve, survived plagues by refusing to die. They did not know that somewhere in human DNA was written a simple command that overrode logic and fear and common sense. Never surrender, never stop fighting, never accept that anything is truly impossible. They had given Earth 24 hours. They did not realize they had just given humanity all the time it needed. In her cabin on the Pacific Ocean, finished her analysis and sent it to her brother. In his apartment in Seoul, received a call from a woman with a very old voice and a very strange offer. In bunkers and basements and hidden facilities around the world, people who had been preparing for something like this their entire lives finally opened their eyes. The day the sky burned was the day humanity woke up. And the universe would never be the same. The phone call that changed everything came at 3 in the morning. Had not slept. He had spent hours calling every contact he had, every scientist and engineer and researcher who might possibly understand his theories. Most did not answer. Those who did either laughed at him or cried about the end of the world. Nobody wanted to discuss quantum physics when alien warships filled the sky. Then an unknown number appeared on his screen. The voice on the other end belonged to an old woman who spoke with the calm authority of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Doctor," she said, "my name is, I have read every paper you ever published. I believe your theories are correct, and I have something you need to see." 2 hours later, a military helicopter landed on the roof of his apartment building, climbed aboard without asking questions. The world was ending. Normal rules no longer applied. The helicopter flew north, toward the mountains of Provence. It landed near what appeared to be an abandoned mining facility, rusted and forgotten. Armed soldiers escorted inside, through corridors that descended deep into the earth, past security checkpoints that scanned his face and fingerprints and retinas. Finally, he emerged into a vast underground chamber that made him stop and stare. The space was enormous, carved from solid rock and filled with equipment that looked nothing like anything he had ever seen. Strange machines hummed with energy that made his skin tingle. Cables thick as tree trunks connected devices that seemed to bend light around them. Scientists in white coats moved between workstations, their faces showing exhaustion and desperate hope. At the center of it all stood. She was 63 years old, small and thin, with hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her face was lined with decades of secrets. She had spent her entire career in places that did not officially exist, working on projects that were never acknowledged. Now she looked at with eyes that held something he did not expect. Relief. "In 1987, she said without introduction, a craft crashed in the mountains near here. Not a plane, not a satellite, something else. The government recovered the wreckage and brought it to this facility. I have been studying it ever since." She led him deeper into the chamber, past machines that hurt to look at directly, until they reached a sealed vault. Inside, suspended in a field of soft blue light, floated fragments of metal that seemed to shift and change color as he watched. "We could not understand it," continued. "The materials were impossible. The energy patterns made no sense. We spent 30 years trying to reverse engineer this technology, and we failed again and again. But we learned enough to know that it was real, that faster-than-light travel was possible, that dimensions beyond our own existed." She turned to face him. "When your papers were published, I read them immediately. You had built theoretical models for things we had observed but could not explain. You were the bridge we were missing. I requested contact with you many times, but I was always. The project was too secret. The risk of exposure was too great." "And now?" asked. Smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "Now we have 20 hours until those ships begin their attack. Now there is no more time for secrets. Now we either use everything we have, or we die." She handed him a tablet containing decades of research, observations, and failed experiments. Began reading. Within minutes, he understood why they had failed. Within an hour, he knew how to fix it. His theories were not complete, but combined with their observations, combined with the alien fragments and the equipment they had built, he could see a path forward. It was dangerous. It was untested. It would probably kill everyone involved. But it was possible. While worked made calls of her own. Across the world, people received messages that contained nothing but coordinates and a single phrase: "Protocol 0 is active." They came because they had been waiting their entire lives for this call. Was 19 years old, a girl from who had been arrested twice for hacking into systems that were supposed to be. She had crashed 3 stock exchanges once, just to prove she could. The authorities had wanted to imprison her, had offered her a different path. Now arrived at the bunker with a backpack full of custom equipment and a grin that suggested she was actually enjoying the end of the world. Was 54, a retired Special Forces commander who had spent the last 5 years tending his grandmother's farm in the countryside. He had seen more combat than any person should survive. He had lost friends and innocence and parts of himself that would never grow back. He had retired because he was tired of death. Now he put on his old uniform and flew toward the mountains, because some things were worth fighting for one more time. Was 41, an aerospace engineer who had been fired from NASA 3 years ago. Her crime was proposing designs that her supervisors called impossible. Her engines were too efficient. Her fuel systems violated known physics. Her ideas were dangerous because they suggested that everything humanity knew about space travel was wrong. Now she walked into his laboratory and saw the alien fragments and realized that she had been right all along. Others came too. Soldiers and scientists and engineers and hackers, people who had been collected over decades by an old woman who understood that someday, somehow, humanity would need them. As the hours passed, the bunker became a hive of desperate activity, worked with to modify their equipment based on his theories, designed weapons that used principles humanity had never applied before, created communication systems that could not be jammed or intercepted, organized the military personnel into teams ready to deploy at a moment's notice. And in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, continued her observations. Her research vessel had been forgotten in the chaos. Nobody came to evacuate them. Nobody sent orders. So she created her own mission. She watched the alien fleet constantly, tracking patrol patterns and shield frequencies and communication signals. She mapped weaknesses that nobody else was looking for. When she finally connected with the bunker through secure channel, she brought more than data. She brought a plan. Their formation has gaps, she reported, her voice steady despite everything. They are not expecting resistance. They patrol in predictable patterns because they have never needed to do otherwise. If we can strike fast enough, hard enough, we can create chaos. And in chaos, there is opportunity. Listened carefully. How long would we have before they reorganize? Minutes, perhaps less, but minutes might be enough. The old woman nodded slowly. Around her, the others waited. Scientists who had spent their lives being told their ideas were impossible. Soldiers who had survived odds that should have killed them. Young people who refused to accept that the universe had already decided their fate. Then we have a plan, said. Now we just need to build the impossible in the next 16 hours. Nobody laughed. Nobody said it could not be done. They simply went to work. Outside, the world continued to fall apart. Governments surrendered. Cities burned. Millions of people spent what they believed were their final hours saying goodbye to loved ones or praying to gods or simply waiting for the end. But deep beneath the mountains of Korea, a different story was being written. Humanity had always been at its best when facing extinction. Something in the species refused to accept defeat, refused to believe that any situation was truly hopeless. The thought they understood Earth. They had studied the radio signals, analyzed the technology, calculated the threat level. By their measures, humans were no more dangerous than insects. They did not understand that insects had survived for 400 million years by refusing to give up. They did not understand that the same stubborn life force that kept ants rebuilding flooded colonies and bees, returning to burned hives, lived in human hearts as well. They did not understand that they had just made the worst mistake in their 400 years of conquest. They had given humanity a reason to fight. In the bunker, looked up from his equations and met his sister's eyes through the video screen. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. They had grown up together, survived together, and now they would face the end of everything together. But maybe, just maybe, it would not be the end after all. The clock continued to tick. 16 hours remained. The quiet before the storm was almost over. And humanity was ready. Admiral was confused. He had been watching Earth for the past 20 hours, expecting the usual pattern of surrender and desperation. Every species reacted the same way when the Dominion arrived. First came the panic. Then came the futile resistance. Then came the begging, the pleading, the offers of tribute and submission. Finally came the acceptance of death. Earth had shown panic. Earth had shown some resistance, pathetic missiles that his ships destroyed without effort. But then something strange happened. Earth went quiet. The frantic communication stopped. The military movement ceased. The radio and television broadcasts fell silent. For the past 4 hours, the planet had been completely still, as if every human had simply decided to stop fighting and wait. Did not like it. In 400 years of conquest, he had learned to trust his instincts. Those instincts had kept him alive through battles that killed thousands of his fellow officers. Now those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Perhaps they have accepted their fate, his lieutenant suggested. Some species do. They realize resistance is futile and choose to spend their final moments in peace. Perhaps, said, but he did not believe it. He had studied the human transmissions. These creatures had spent their entire history fighting each other over patches of dirt and pieces of colored cloth. They did not seem like a species capable of peaceful acceptance. Begin the cleansing bombardment, he ordered. Target the major population centers first. I want this planet empty within 6 hours. His fleet moved into attack formation. 10,000 warships positioned themselves in a sphere around Earth, their weapons charging with energy that could crack continents. The plasma torpedoes they carried had destroyed civilizations that made humanity look like children playing with sticks. The first wave launched. 500 torpedoes streaked toward Earth, targeting cities across every continent. New York, Tokyo, London, Beijing, Moscow, Sydney, and yes, Seoul, where somewhere an old woman in a bunker watched the sky and smiled. The torpedoes crossed the upper atmosphere. Then they vanished. One moment they were there, burning through the sky like falling stars. The next moment they were simply gone, as if they had never existed at all. Stared at his tactical display, unable to process what he was seeing. What happened? Where did they go? Before anyone could answer, 17 of his warships disappeared. Not destroyed, not damaged. They did not explode or break apart or even fire their engines. They simply stopped existing, pulled through holes in space that opened without warning and closed just as fast. Felt something he had not experienced in 300 years, fear. All ships raise shields to maximum, prepare for. He never finished the sentence. Deep beneath the Korean mountains, sat at the center of a machine that should not have existed. Wires connected to his temples. Screens surrounded him, showing calculations that would have taken supercomputers years to process. His mind was on fire, burning with the effort of holding open doorways between dimensions that human science said were impossible. But had never cared about impossible. The alien fragments they had recovered provided the power. Decades of research provided the framework. Impossible engines provided the delivery system. Networks provided the coordination. And watching from her ship in the Pacific provided the targets. They had built weapons that made no sense by any known physics, missiles that could teleport past shields, bombs that appeared inside engine cores, projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The technology was crude compared to the Dominion's elegant systems, but crude could still kill. Target the command ships first, said through the communication link. Her voice was calm, professional, as if she were directing a routine naval exercise instead of humanity's first interstellar battle. Without coordination, their formation will break. Nodded and focused, reality bent around him. Space folded in ways that hurt to think about, and across 50,000 kilometers, human weapons appeared where they should not have been able to go. Admiral watched in horror as his fleet began to die. The humans were not supposed to have this technology. They were not supposed to understand dimensional manipulation. They were not supposed to be able to target his ships through their shields. They were not supposed to be fighting back at all. But they were, and they were winning. In the first hour, the Dominion lost 3,000 ships. Their weapons could not hit targets that teleported before impact. Their shields could not stop bombs that appeared already inside them. Their coordination broke down as command vessels exploded one after another. Tried everything. He ordered concentrated fire on Earth's surface. The plasma vanished into dimensional rifts. He commanded ramming attacks. The ships that approached Earth were torn apart by weapons they could not see coming. He attempted retreat formations. Wormholes opened in his escape routes and swallowed entire squadrons. The humans fought like nothing he had ever seen. They fought without honor, without rules, without any of the conventions that civilized species followed. They fought like animals defending their den, like insects protecting their hive, like creatures who had absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. They fought like humans. By the fourth hour, had lost 8,000 warships. His mighty armada, the same fleet that had conquered 100 worlds, was being dismantled by a species that had been building rockets for less than a century. "Admiral," his lieutenant said, his voice shaking, "we must retreat. If we remain here, we will all die." Wanted to argue. He wanted to fight. He had never retreated in 400 years of service. The shame of running from primitives would follow him forever. But shame meant nothing if he was dead. "All ships," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "fall back to the edge of the system. Maximum speed. Do not stop for anything." What remained of his fleet turned and ran. In the bunker, watched them go. Her old eyes were wet with tears she did not try to hide. 30 years of preparation. 30 years of being called crazy, of working in secret, of believing that someday humanity would need everything she had built. Today was that day, and they had won. But she was not finished. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies, I want them to hear this." His fingers flew across her equipment. Within seconds, a communication beam locked onto the retreating fleet. "Admiral," said, her voice carrying across the void of space, "you should never have touched Earth." In his damaged command ship, heard the transmission and felt his blood run cold. "You came here expecting easy prey. You found something else. We are humanity. We have spent our entire existence fighting for survival. We have killed each other over land and resources and ideas. We have survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have ended our species 1,000 times." Her voice hardened. "Did you really think aliens would scare us?" Said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Now we have your technology. We have your navigation charts. We know where the Galactic Senate meets. We know the locations of your trade routes, your military installations." Paused, letting the words sink in. "We are coming, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to make sure that no one ever makes the mistake you made today. No one will ever threaten Earth again. And if anyone tries..." Her voice dropped to something cold and quiet, something that carried the weight of a species that had spent 10,000 generations learning how to survive. "There will be no retreat for them. There will be no surrender. There will be no mercy. You have seen what we can do in 18 hours of desperation. Imagine what we will do with time to prepare." The transmission ended. Admiral sat in silence as his broken fleet limped toward the edge of Sol's system. Behind them, the blue and green planet that was supposed to be an easy conquest grew smaller and smaller. He had come to Earth expecting to add another world to the Dominion's collection. Instead, he had awakened something that the galaxy had never seen before. And deep in his ancient heart, Admiral knew that the universe would never be the same. The Galactic Senate had governed the known universe for 100,000 years. 200 species sat in its great chamber, a vast sphere carved from the heart of an artificial moon that orbited a star at the center of civilized space. Some of these species were older than most planets. Some commanded fleets of millions. Some had evolved beyond physical form entirely, existing as pure energy or thought or something that had no name in any language. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had weathered wars that consumed entire galaxies. They had watched species climb from mud to stars and back to dust again. Nothing surprised them anymore. Nothing could shake their ancient confidence in the order they had built. Then the transmission arrived from the border. High Arbiter watched the footage in silence. The crystalline being who led the Senate was 2 million years old, born in an era when stars were still young. In all that time, had never seen anything like what appeared on the viewing screen. The footage showed an armada in full retreat. 50,000 warships reduced to barely 30,000, running from a single blue planet in an unremarkable system. The footage showed weapons that should not exist appearing inside shields that should have been impenetrable. The footage showed technology that the most advanced species in the Senate would need another million years to develop. And the footage came from a species that had been classified as primitive barely a century ago. The Senate chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had not spoken to each other in 10,000 years began shouting. Ancient rivals forgot their grudges in the face of this new impossibility. The once feared as the greatest military power in the galaxy suddenly looked very small. Silence commanded, and the weight of 2 million years pressed down on every being in the chamber. The noise stopped instantly. "There is more," said. "A second transmission has arrived from Earth itself." The viewing screen changed. Now it showed a human face, tired and triumphant, looked into the camera with eyes that had seen impossible things and refused to look away. "We are humanity," he began. 3 days ago, we were a primitive species, barely capable of leaving our own planet. We had chemical rockets and nuclear fission and radio signals that traveled at the speed of light. By your standards, we were insects, barely worth noticing." He paused, and something like a smile crossed his face. "Today, we have reverse-engineered technology that your greatest minds spent developing. We did it in 30 years, working from fragments of a crashed vessel that we barely understood. We weaponized it in 18 hours, while an armada of 50,000 warships waited to destroy us." The Senate chamber was completely silent. Even species that communicated through means other than sound seemed to be holding their breath. "They came to enslave us," continued. "They came expecting easy prey. They found something else. Now they run home with their tails between their legs, carrying stories about the crazy primitives who should have been easy to crush." He leaned forward, and his voice grew serious. "We have their navigation charts. We downloaded them during the battle while their ships were too busy dying to protect their databases. We know where the Galactic Senate meets. We know the locations of your trade routes, your military installations. We know where they came from. We know how to find you." Across the chamber, species exchanged glances of fear and calculation. Some began calculating how quickly they could move their fleets. Others wondered if this human was bluffing. Still others considered whether it might be wise to strike first, to destroy Earth before this upstart species could become a true threat. But was not finished. "We could use this knowledge the way they intended to use their power," he said. "We could build fleets of our own. We could conquer and enslave and destroy. We have proven that we can fight. We have proven that we can win. We could become exactly what they are, except better at it." He shook his head slowly. "But we are not we are humanity. We fight when threatened. We destroy when cornered, but we also build, we create, we reach out. We spent thousands of years murdering each other before we learned that cooperation works better than competition. We are still learning that lesson. We are not perfect. We are not wise. We are young and foolish and full of terrible mistakes." His voice softened. "But we are also curious. We look at the stars and we want to know what lives there. We find problems and we want to solve them. We meet strangers and we want to understand them. That curiosity brought us to space. That curiosity will take us further than any weapon ever could." Behind him, other faces appeared, still on her ship in the Pacific, standing in her bunker surrounded by impossible machines. and dozens of others, the people who had saved their world. "So here is our invitation," said. "Meet us not as conquerors or subjects, but as equals. Trade with us. Share knowledge with us. Let us join your Senate not as the primitive species you expected, but as the civilization we have become. We have so much to learn from you, and maybe, just maybe, you have something to learn from us." His expression shifted. The softness disappeared, replaced by something hard and cold. "But understand this, and understand it well. If anyone else touches Earth the way they did, there will be no retreat. There will be no surrender. There will be no mercy. We have shown you what we can do in 18 hours of desperation. Imagine what we could do with preparation. Imagine what we could do with resources. Imagine what we could do if you actually made us angry." He held the camera's gaze for a long moment. "You have a choice. You can welcome us as partners. You can ignore us and hope we go away, or you can try to destroy us. But before you choose that third option, ask Admiral how well it worked for him." The transmission ended. The Senate chamber remained frozen for what felt like eternity. 200 species, representing trillions of individuals and millions of years of civilization, sat in perfect stillness. They had faced threats before. They had survived wars and plagues and disasters beyond counting, but they had never faced anything like this. Finally spoke. "The humans have made their intentions clear. They seek membership in this body. They seek to join us as equals." The ambassador, a reptilian who had watched his species' reputation shatter in a single day, rose to his feet. "They must be destroyed, before they grow stronger, before they—" "Before they what?" Another voice interrupted. It belonged to a being made of flowing light, an ancient species that had achieved energy-form existence long before most present civilizations were born. Before they prove that any species can rise from nothing, before they show the conquered peoples of the galaxy that their conquerors are not invincible. The fell silent. "The humans are dangerous," the light being continued. "This is obvious, but danger can be channeled, it can be directed, perhaps it can even be made useful." Other voices joined the debate. Some called for war. Some called for alliance. Some called for caution and observation. The arguments raged for hours, then days, as the greatest minds in the galaxy tried to determine what to do about a species that had done the impossible. In the end, it was not logic or strategy that decided the matter. It was something simpler. Fear. The Senate had maintained peace for 100,000 years by ensuring that no single species became too powerful. They had balanced rivals against each other, supported the weak against the strong, prevented any one empire from dominating the rest. It was a delicate system, built on careful calculation and ancient treaties. The humans had just shattered that balance entirely, and the Senate had no idea how to put it back together. Better to bring them inside, some argued. Better to teach them the rules, show them the traditions, integrate them into the existing order. Better to make them part of the system than to leave them outside, growing stronger, learning more, preparing for the day when they would no longer need to ask permission. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, the Galactic Senate voted to extend an invitation to humanity. It was not a unanimous decision. It was not even a popular decision. But it was a decision made by beings who had survived for millions of years by recognizing when the winds of history were changing. The winds were changing now, the humans were coming. And the universe would never be the same. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, humanity's delegation walked into the Galactic Senate chamber. Led them. She was 27 now, no longer a junior officer on a research vessel, but Admiral of Earth's first interstellar fleet. The title still felt strange on her shoulders. A year ago, she had been studying ocean currents and dreaming about the mysteries of the deep sea. Now she walked across floors that had been polished by the feet of species older than her entire planet. Behind her came the others, whose theories had saved humanity and nearly burned out his mind in the process, walking with a cane now but still carrying the fierce light in her eyes that had driven her through 30 years of secret work, who had somehow managed to hack 3 alien databases during the trip here just to prove she could, who had traded his soldier's uniform for a diplomat's suit but still walked like a man ready for war, already studying the architecture of the chamber and making notes on engineering principles that human science would need decades to understand. They wore simple clothing, no elaborate robes or ceremonial armor like the other species, just practical uniforms designed for people who had work to do. They were not here to impress, they were here to begin. The Senate chamber was vast beyond anything Earth had ever built. It could hold representatives from 200 species, arranged in tiers that rose toward a distant ceiling made of living crystal. Light came from everywhere and nowhere. The air carried the sense of 100 different worlds. Gravity shifted subtly from section to section, adjusted to accommodate beings who had evolved under different suns. All eyes turned to the humans as they entered. Some of those eyes held curiosity. These primitives had done something remarkable, something that rewrote the rules of galactic power. How had they managed it? What else could they do? What secrets were hidden in their small blue world? Some eyes held fear. The humans had destroyed our armada in less than a day. They had developed technology that surpassed species with millions of years of advancement. If they could do that when threatened, what would they do with time and resources? Some eyes held hope. Not everyone in the galaxy was happy with the existing order. Not every species had chosen to join the Senate willingly. Some had been conquered, integrated, forced to accept rules written by others. Those species watched the humans and wondered if maybe, finally, something was about to change. The seats were empty. Their dominion had collapsed within months of Admiral's defeat. News of the Battle of Earth had spread across conquered worlds like fire through dry grass. For 400 years, they had maintained their empire through the simple belief that they were invincible. The humans had proven that belief wrong, and once that belief was gone, everything else fell apart. 300 worlds had declared independence. 40 species had emerged from hiding. The military, stretched thin by centuries of occupation, could not hold everything together. Now they sat in there, watching their empire crumble, cursing the day they had ever heard of a planet called Earth. The humans had done more than save themselves. They had shattered a galactic order that had stood for. High Arbiter observed the human delegation with ancient eyes. 2 million years of existence had taught the crystalline being to recognize turning points in history. This was one of them. Whatever happened in the next few moments would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. "Humanity," said, voice resonating through the chamber, "you have been granted provisional membership in this body. Do you understand the responsibilities this entails?" Stepped forward. The girl who had calmly recorded an alien invasion had become something else entirely. A leader who had walked through fire and emerged unbroken. A symbol of everything humanity could be when pushed to the edge. "We do," she said, "and we accept." "Then speak your intentions. The Senate would know what humanity hopes to achieve here." Looked around the chamber, at species who had ignored Earth for, at empires who had watched them prepare their invasion and done nothing to stop it, at the so-called leaders who had built their peace on the suffering of weaker worlds. She thought of her parents, dead before she turned 15. She thought of her brother, who had nearly destroyed his own mind to save their world. She thought of, who had spent 30 years preparing for a moment everyone else said would never come. She thought of Earth, blue and green and beautiful, full of people who had no idea how close they had come to extinction. "Our intentions are simple," she said. "We intend to change everything." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Species exchanged glances. Some reached for weapons that suddenly seemed inadequate. Others leaned forward, eager to hear more. "Not through conquest," continued. Not through force, not through the methods that have governed this galaxy for 100,000 years. We intend to change things through the same stubborn refusal to accept limits that brought us here. She took a breath. You see, we have learned something important about the universe. It does not care about your technology or your ancient traditions or your centuries of accumulated power. It does not care about your treaties or your borders or your carefully balanced systems of control. It only cares about one thing. She met gaze directly. Whether you are willing to fight for what matters. We have proven that. And in the past year, we have discovered something interesting. We are not alone. Behind her, the doors to the chamber opened. More humans entered, but they were not alone. Representatives from dozens of species walked with them. Small beings and large beings, creatures of flesh and light and crystal and void. Survivors of conquest, peoples who had been marginalized and forgotten. Voices that had been silenced for thousands of years. These are our friends, said. We found them in the chaos after the collapse. Species who were told they were primitive, inferior, worthless. Species who were conquered and enslaved and nearly destroyed. Species who looked at the stars and dreamed of freedom they thought they would never have. They were told the same things we were told, that they were nothing, that they could never compete with the great powers, that their only choices were submission or extinction. We showed them a different way. The mixed delegation spread out across the chamber floor, standing together in defiance of every tradition the Senate had established. Human and alien, ancient and young, powerful and weak, united by something that had no name in any language. We are not just joining your Senate, said. We are reforming it. The old rules are broken. The old order is finished. Whether you like it or not, whether you fight it or not, things are going to change. Her voice dropped to something cold and quiet. You can be part of that change. You can help us build something better, or you can resist and learn what we learned about the choice is yours. The Senate chamber remained silent for a long moment. Studied the human admiral with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall beyond counting. The crystalline being understood power, understood politics, understood the delicate balance that kept the galaxy from descending into endless war. But also understood something else, something that most of the Senate had forgotten over the long of their rule. Change was inevitable. The only question was whether you shaped it or were shaped by it. Slowly, the High Arbiter bowed. It was a gesture that had not been offered to any species in 50,000 years, a recognition of equal standing, an acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted in ways that could not be undone. Welcome to the Galactic Senate, humanity. We have much to learn from each other. Nodded, accepting the gesture without triumph or arrogance. There would be time for celebration later. There would be time for all the work that needed to be done. For now, this moment was enough. Behind her caught eye. The old woman was crying, tears running down her weathered face, not from sadness, from something else entirely, pride, relief, hope. They had done it. Not just survived, not just won, they had changed the shape of the galaxy itself. And this was only the beginning. Outside the Senate chamber, the stars burned cold and bright against the darkness of space. Billions of worlds circled those stars, home to trillions of beings who would wake tomorrow to find their universe transformed. Some would fear the change. Some would embrace it. Some would fight against it with everything they had. But none of them could stop it. Humanity had arrived, and they were not going anywhere. In the years to come, historians would look back on this moment and struggle to explain how a species so young, so foolish, so full of contradictions, had managed to rewrite the rules of galactic civilization. They would study the Battle of Earth and the collapse of the Dominion and the reformation of the Senate. They would analyze and theorize and debate. But they would never quite capture the truth. The truth was simple. Humanity had won because they refused to lose. They had changed everything because they refused to accept that anything was unchangeable. They had risen from nothing to stand among the stars because somewhere, deep in their DNA, was written a commandment older than language itself. Never give up, never stop fighting, never accept that the universe has already decided your fate. Walked out of the Senate chamber with her head held high. Around her, humans and aliens moved together toward a future that nobody could predict. The old order was dying. The new order was being born. And humanity, young and foolish and impossibly stubborn, would be there to shape it. The universe would never be the same. But then again, that was exactly the point.